At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law spit in my face and shouted, "You call this garbage food? Cook it all over again." I just smiled. I knew this was coming. But what she didn't know was that her brand new high-paying job was at my company. The next day, the shrew had a surprise. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I'm Opal, and at 65 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty life could throw at me. I was wrong. The turkey was perfect. Golden brown, glistening with herb butter, sitting proudly at the center of my dining room table like it had stepped out of a magazine. The sweet potato casserole bubbled with toasted marshmallows. The cranberry sauce gleamed like rubies in my grandmother's crystal bowl, and the pumpkin pie sat cooling on the kitchen counter, filling the house with cinnamon and nutmeg. I'd been up since 4 in the morning, just like every Thanksgiving for the past 43 years. My hands moved through the familiar rhythm of preparation, the same recipes my mother taught me, the same care I'd put into every holiday meal for my family. Even after my husband passed 7 years ago, I kept the tradition alive. Family was everything to me. "Mom, this looks incredible," Dante said as he walked into the dining room, adjusting his tie. My 38-year-old son had always been handsome, but lately he looked tired, worn down. I wondered if his wife had something to do with that. "Thank you, sweetheart." "Where's Isla?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. My daughter-in-law had a talent for arriving just fashionably late enough to avoid helping with anything. "She's coming. Had to take a work call." Dante's voice carried that apologetic tone I'd grown to recognize over the past 5 years of their marriage. Always making excuses for her. As if summoned by our conversation, Isla swept into the room. At 34, she was undeniably beautiful, the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive salons and designer everything. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her makeup was flawless despite supposedly rushing from a work call, and her black dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Opal," she said with that smile that never reached her eyes. Not Mom or even Happy Thanksgiving. Just my name, delivered like she was greeting a stranger. "Happy Thanksgiving, dear," I replied, determined to keep things pleasant. "You look lovely." She glanced around the dining room, her nose wrinkling slightly. Very. Traditional." The word traditional came out like she'd tasted something sour. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed the feeling down. This was Thanksgiving. Family time. "I made your favorite green bean casserole," I offered, hoping to bridge whatever gap seemed to widen between us with each passing holiday. "Oh." Isla's eyebrows raised in what might have been surprise or disdain. "I'm actually trying to eat cleaner now. You know, organic, farm to table. That casserole is basically just processed soup and fried onions." Dante shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Isla, Mom worked really hard." "It's fine," I interrupted, though my throat felt tight. "There's plenty of other food." We took our seats around the table that had hosted so many happy memories. Dante sat to my right, where his father used to sit. Isla positioned herself directly across from me, like we were preparing for battle rather than sharing a meal. I said grace, my voice steady, despite the tension crackling in the air. When I finished, I began serving the turkey, my hands proud of the perfect slices falling onto each plate. "This turkey looks dry," Isla announced before I'd even finished carving. "Did you use a meat thermometer? Because honestly, nothing ruins Thanksgiving like dry turkey." My hands stilled for just a moment. "I've been cooking turkey for over 4 decades, dear. I think I know what I'm doing." "Experience doesn't always equal competence," she replied with a little laugh, as if she'd made a joke instead of an insult. Dante cleared his throat. "The turkey looks great, Mom." But Isla wasn't finished. As I passed around the dishes, she had something to say about everything. The stuffing was too salty. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. The cranberry sauce was store-bought, wasn't it? She could tell. Each criticism felt like a small knife, cutting away at the joy I'd tried so hard to create. But I smiled. I nodded. I apologized. Because that's what I'd learned to do over the past 5 years. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Don't give Dante a reason to choose between his mother and his wife, because I already knew who would win. Then came the moment that changed everything. Isla took a bite of my green bean casserole, the one she'd already criticized, chewed thoughtfully, and then her face twisted in disgust. She didn't swallow. Instead, she leaned forward and spit it directly onto her plate, the sound wet and revolting in the sudden silence. "Oh my God!" she gasped, grabbing her water glass. "That is absolutely revolting. What did you put in this? It tastes like garbage." My face burned with shame and humiliation. Dante's mouth fell open, but no words came out. The dining room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as Isla's words echoed in my head. But she wasn't done. Isla stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Her face was flushed with anger, her perfect composure finally cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. "You know what, Opal?" Her voice rose, filling every corner of my home. "I am sick and tired of pretending this food is edible. This whole meal is a disaster. The turkey is dry, the vegetables are overcooked, and everything tastes like it came from a can." She gestured wildly at the table, at the food I'd spent hours preparing with love and care. "You call this garbage food?" she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that made me flinch. "This is supposed to be Thanksgiving dinner? This is supposed to be special?" Then she did something that will be burned into my memory forever. Isla leaned across the table, her face inches from mine, and spit directly in my face. The saliva hit my cheek and dripped down toward my chin. The shock of it, the sheer disrespect and cruelty, made my entire body freeze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Cook it again," she hissed, her voice low and venomous now. "All of it, because I wouldn't feed this slop to a dog, let alone serve it to guests." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the spit still on my face, could see Dante sitting there like a statue, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I should have exploded. I should have screamed back, thrown her out of my house, demanded that my son choose between his mother and this monster he'd married. Any normal person would have. Instead, I smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but I felt it curve my lips as I reached for my napkin and calmly wiped my face. Because in that moment, as Isla stood there breathing hard from her tantrum, as my son sat frozen in his chair, I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly what was going to happen next, and it was going to be beautiful. "Of course, dear," I said quietly, my voice steady as granite. "I'll start over." As I stood to clear the table, my smile widened just a fraction. Isla had no idea what she'd just walked into. None of them did. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. The sound of Isla's heels clicking against my hardwood floor as she stormed out that night echoed through the house long after she was gone. Dante had mumbled some pathetic apology about her being stressed from work, before following his wife like a lost puppy. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of what should have been a beautiful Thanksgiving dinner, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than hurt. I felt powerful. You see, what happened that night wasn't a surprise to me. I'd been expecting it, planning for it for months. But to understand why, you need to know how I got here, how a 65-year-old widow became someone capable of orchestrating what was about to unfold. It started 5 years ago, when Dante first brought Isla home. She was dazzling. I'll give her that. All perfect smiles and charming conversation, at least when Dante was around, but I saw through it immediately. I'd been married to a manipulator once before, early in my life, and I recognized the signs, the way she'd compliment me in front of Dante, then make subtle digs when he stepped out of the room. How she'd encourage him to spend holidays at her parents' house instead of with me. The gradual way she began isolating him from his childhood friends, his hobbies, even from me. "Your mother is so intense," she'd whisper to him, just loud enough for me to overhear. "Maybe we should give her some space this weekend." Or my personal favorite, I think your mom might be getting a little senile, honey. She keeps telling the same stories over and over. I wasn't senile. I was lonely. After my husband Richard died, those stories were all I had left of the family memories that meant everything to me. But Isla turned even my grief into a weapon against me. The worst part was watching my son disappear piece by piece. Dante had always been sensitive, eager to please. In high school, he'd call me every day after school. In college, he'd drive home most weekends just to have dinner with his dad and me. He was thoughtful, kind, the sort of man who remembered birthdays and always helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. But Isla changed all that. Within 6 months of their relationship, his phone calls became weekly, then monthly, then only when she wasn't around. He stopped visiting for random dinners. He forgot my birthday for the first time in 38 years. When I gently mentioned it, Isla was quick to jump in. "Oh, Opal, you didn't tell me it was your birthday. Dante, you know how scattered you've been at work. It's not your fault your mom didn't remind us." She made it sound like my fault for not managing my own son's calendar. Like I was supposed to beg for acknowledgement on my own birthday. The isolation got worse after they married. Suddenly, every family gathering came with conditions. Isla would develop mysterious headaches if I suggested we visit on Sunday afternoons. She'd remember urgent work commitments whenever I invited them for dinner. And when they did come, she'd spend the entire time on her phone or making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my decorating, my outdated way of doing things. "Dante and I are trying to eat healthier now," she'd say, pushing around the food on her plate. "All these heavy, old-fashioned dishes aren't really good for us." Or, "Wow, Opal, you really went all out. It's so sweet how you try so hard to impress us." Each comment was crafted to sound caring while actually being cruel. She was an artist at it. The breaking point came last Christmas. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect dinner, buying gifts I couldn't really afford on my small pension, decorating the house the way Dante had loved as a child. Isla took one look at the tree, a real pine I'd struggled to put up by myself, and wrinkled her nose. "Oh no, Dante, didn't you tell her about my allergies? I'm severely allergic to pine. We won't be able to stay long." They left after 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a Christmas I'd planned for weeks. That night, sitting alone in my living room with all those unopened gifts under a tree that apparently made my daughter-in-law sick, I realized something important. I was tired of being the victim in this story, so I decided to change the narrative. You see, what Isla never bothered to learn about me was who I really was. She saw a lonely widow living in a modest house, wearing clothes from department store sales, cooking old-fashioned meals. She assumed I was helpless, financially dependent on my deceased husband's small life insurance policy, probably surviving on Social Security and the occasional handout. She couldn't have been more wrong. When Richard died 7 years ago, he left me more than just grief and loneliness. He left me a challenge. You see, my husband had been a dreamer, full of big ideas and bigger schemes that never quite panned out. He'd started and failed at a dozen different businesses over the course of our marriage. By the time he passed, we had accumulated significant debt and very little savings. But what Richard did leave me was a small patent he'd filed years earlier for a specialized manufacturing process. He'd always believed it would be valuable someday, but he died before he could figure out how to market it. I could have sold it immediately for a modest sum and lived quietly on the proceeds. Instead, I spent 6 months learning everything I could about the industry, about manufacturing, about business licensing and distribution. I was 58 years old and had never run a business in my life, but I was determined. I licensed Richard's patent to 3 different companies under my maiden name, Opal Morrison, not Opal Williams, the grieving widow, not Dante's mother, just Opal Morrison, businesswoman. The royalties started small, but the patent was better than Richard had realized. Within 2 years, I was earning more in a month than I used to see in a year. Within 4 years, I'd used those royalties to invest in other patents, to start my own small manufacturing consulting firm. By the time Isla spit in my face at my Thanksgiving table, Morrison Consulting was bringing in just over $2 million annually. I owned my house outright, had more money and investments than I knew what to do with, and employed 43 people across 2 locations. And nobody in my family knew any of it. I'd kept it secret partly out of habit. Richard's failures had taught me to be cautious about sharing business dreams. But mostly, I'd kept it secret because I wanted to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing to offer but love. The answer had been devastating and enlightening. Dante saw me as a burden, someone to be managed and appeased, but not truly valued. Isla saw me as an obstacle, something inconvenient that stood between her and complete control over her husband. Neither of them ever asked about my life, my interests, my dreams, or my struggles. I was just Mom, or Opal, a supporting character in their story, not the protagonist of my own. But that was about to change, because 3 weeks ago, while researching potential new hires for my company's marketing department, I'd come across an interesting resume. Someone with impressive credentials, a desperate need for immediate employment, and a salary requirement that was ambitious enough to suggest she thought very highly of herself. The applicant's name was Isla Williams. My daughter-in-law had no idea that Morrison Consulting even existed, let alone that I owned it. When she applied for the senior marketing coordinator position, a job that paid $95,000 a year, she was just shooting high, hoping to land somewhere that would appreciate her extensive experience in brand management. I'd read her cover letter 3 times, each time feeling that same smile creep across my face that I'd worn while she screamed at me across my Thanksgiving table. I am excited to bring my innovative approach to marketing strategy and my proven track record of results to Morrison Consulting, she'd written. I believe I would be an invaluable addition to your team. Invaluable. That was rich. But I was about to find out exactly how much value Isla Williams really had. Because tomorrow morning, she was going to walk into Morrison Consulting for her first day of work, and I was going to be waiting for her. I arrived at Morrison Consulting at 6:30 that Monday morning, a full 2 hours before Isla was scheduled to begin her first day. The November air was crisp, and downtown was still quiet, except for the occasional delivery truck rumbling past our building on 5th Street. My heels clicked against the marble lobby floor as I made my way to the elevator. The security guard, Marcus, gave me his usual respectful nod. "Good morning, Ms. Morrison. You're here early today." "Big day ahead, Marcus. Big day." If only he knew. I'd spent the weekend meticulously planning every detail of what was about to unfold. My assistant Jennifer had prepared all the necessary paperwork for Isla's orientation. The IT department had set up her computer access and email account. Everything appeared completely normal and professional. What wasn't normal was the way my heart was pounding with anticipation. I settled into my corner office on the 15th floor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city where I'd raised my son, where I'd buried my husband, where I'd built this company from nothing but grief and determination. On my desk sat a framed photo of Dante at his college graduation, back when his smile was genuine and his eyes weren't clouded with the exhaustion that seemed to follow him everywhere now. At 7:45, Jennifer knocked on my door. "Ms. Morrison, the new hire is here early. Should I bring her up for the standard orientation meeting?" "Actually, Jennifer, I'd like to handle the orientation personally today. Send her directly to my office in 15 minutes. Jennifer's eyebrows raised slightly. I rarely handled new employee orientations myself, but she was too professional to question my decision. "Of course. Should I prepare anything special?" "Just the standard packet." "And Jennifer?" "Close my door after you bring her in. I don't want us to be interrupted." The next 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. I reviewed Isla's resume one more time, marveling at how she'd managed to inflate a series of entry-level marketing jobs into something that sounded almost impressive. According to her application, she'd been instrumental in driving brand awareness initiatives at her previous company. In reality, I'd done some checking, and she'd been fired 3 months ago for consistently missing deadlines and what her former supervisor delicately called interpersonal conflicts with team members. Translation: nobody could stand working with her. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard voices in the hallway outside my office. Jennifer's professional tone, and then another voice that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "This building is gorgeous. Very impressive. I had no idea Morrison Consulting was so well established. Of course she didn't. Isla had never bothered to research anything about me, including what I might have accomplished in the 7 years since my husband died. The knock came soft but confident. "Come in," I called, turning my chair so I was facing the window instead of the door. I wanted to see her face when she realized who was sitting behind this desk. "Ms. Morrison?" Jennifer's voice was warm and professional. "I'd like you to meet Isla Williams, our new senior marketing coordinator. Isla, this is Ms. Opal Morrison, our founder and CEO." I turned my chair slowly, letting the moment build. The look on Isla's face was everything I'd imagined and more. Her mouth actually fell open, forming a perfect little O of shock. The professional smile she'd been wearing crumbled like a house of cards. Her perfectly manicured hand, which had been extended for a handshake, froze in midair. "Hello, Isla," I said calmly, rising from my chair with the same grace I'd maintained while she spit in my face 3 days earlier. "Welcome to Morrison Consulting." For a moment, nobody moved. Jennifer stood in the doorway, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Isla stared at me like she was seeing a ghost, and I savored every second of her obvious confusion and dawning horror. I don't." Isla's voice came out as barely a whisper. This is your company?" "I founded it 7 years ago," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat. Jennifer?" "Thank you. Please close the door behind you." Jennifer left us alone, and the silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Isla remained standing, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, confusion, fear, and then something that might have been calculation. "Opal," she said finally, her voice artificially bright as she seemed to remember herself. "I had no idea you owned a business. This is incredible. What a coincidence that I ended up applying here." "Coincidence," I repeated, settling back into my chair and folding my hands on the desk. "Yes, let's talk about coincidences." I opened her file and pretended to review it, though I'd memorized every word. "According to your application, you're looking for a challenging role where you can make a significant impact on a growing company's brand strategy. Is that accurate?" Isla nodded eagerly, probably thinking she could charm her way through this the same way she'd charmed her way through everything else in her life. "Absolutely. I'm very excited about the opportunity to contribute to Morrison Consulting's continued success." "Wonderful." I closed the file and looked directly at her. "Because this position is indeed challenging. You'll be reporting directly to me, which means I'll be closely monitoring your performance, your attitude, and your ability to work collaboratively with your colleagues." The word collaboratively hung in the air between us. I could see her processing the implications, beginning to understand that this wasn't the power dynamic she was used to. "I'm sure that won't be a problem," she said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "I hope not. Because at Morrison Consulting, we have very high standards for professional behavior. We expect our employees to treat each other with respect and dignity at all times. Anyone who fails to meet those standards finds themselves looking for work elsewhere very quickly." Isla's face was pale now, but she managed to nod. "Of course, professionalism is very important to me." I almost laughed at that, but I maintained my composure. "Excellent. Now, let's discuss your salary and benefits package." I slid a contract across the desk to her. Isla's eyes widened as she saw the figure at the top. $95,000 annually, just as advertised. More money than she'd ever made in her life, I was certain. This is very generous," she said, and for the first time since she'd walked into my office, she sounded genuinely grateful. "We pay well because we expect excellence," I replied. "And Isla, excellence means consistency. It means showing up every day ready to work hard and treat your colleagues with respect. It means following direction without argument and completing tasks to the highest standard." Each word was carefully chosen, each expectation clearly laid out. I was giving her the rules of engagement, the terms under which this relationship would proceed. "I understand completely," she said, signing the contract with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you so much for this opportunity, Ms. Morrison. I won't let you down." Ms. Morrison, not Opal. Not the dismissive way she'd always said my name in my own home. Here, in my domain, I was Ms. Morrison, and she was my employee. "I certainly hope not," I replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "Jennifer will show you to your workspace and introduce you to the team. Your first assignment will be on your desk by noon." Isla stood as well, clutching her copy of the contract like a lifeline. "Thank you again. I'm really looking forward to working here." As she reached the door, I called out softly, "Oh, and Isla?" She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. Maybe she thought I was going to acknowledge our family connection, to give her some special consideration because she was married to my son. "Yes, Ms. Morrison? I trust you'll find the work environment here much more to your liking than other situations you've been in recently." The reference to Thanksgiving dinner was subtle but unmistakable. Isla's face flushed red, and she nodded quickly before practically fleeing from my office. After she left, I walked to my window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Dante was probably at his own job, completely unaware that his wife now worked for his mother. He had no idea that the balance of power in our little family triangle had just shifted dramatically. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dante. "Hey, Mom. Hope you're feeling better after Thursday. Isla feels really bad about what happened. Maybe we can try dinner again soon?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm feeling much better, sweetheart. In fact, I think things are about to get very interesting." I had 43 employees at Morrison Consulting, but as of today, only one of them owed me a personal debt that had nothing to do with their paycheck. Only one of them had spent years treating me like garbage, isolating me from my own son, and culminating in spitting in my face at my own dinner table. And now that employee was completely, utterly dependent on my goodwill for her financial survival. The smile that crossed my face as I settled back at my desk wasn't cruel. It was satisfied. For the first time in 5 years, I held all the cards, and I was going to play them perfectly. By noon, the entire office was buzzing with curiosity about our new hire. Morrison Consulting wasn't a large company, but it was close-knit, and everyone noticed when the boss personally handled a new employee orientation, especially when that new employee emerged from the meeting looking like she'd seen a ghost. I watched through my office window as Jennifer led Isla around the floor, introducing her to the various department heads and team members. Even from a distance, I could see that Isla was struggling to maintain her usual polished composure. Her smile seemed forced, her laugh a little too bright, her handshakes just a fraction too aggressive. She was overcompensating, and everyone could sense it. At exactly 12 o'clock, I had Jennifer deliver Isla's first assignment. I'd crafted it carefully, choosing a project that was important enough to matter, but complex enough to challenge her inflated sense of her own abilities. Morrison Consulting had just signed a contract with a mid-sized manufacturing company that needed a complete rebranding strategy. The client was demanding, the timeline was tight, and the budget was substantial enough that failure would be costly for everyone involved. It was exactly the kind of high-pressure, high-stakes project that would reveal who Isla really was as a professional. 20 minutes after receiving the assignment, she knocked on my office door. "Come in," I called, not looking up from the quarterly reports I was reviewing. "Ms. Morrison?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "I wanted to discuss the Henderson manufacturing project. What about it?" I continued reading, making her wait. "Well, I was wondering if there might be something else I could start with. Something smaller, maybe, so I can get familiar with the company's processes and standards before taking on such a large client." I set down my papers and looked at her directly. She was fidgeting with her blazer, a nervous habit I'd never seen her display in all the years I'd known her. "Are you saying you don't feel qualified to handle the assignment?" "No, not at all," she said quickly. "I just think it might be more strategic to—" "Isla," I interrupted her, my voice calm but firm. "According to your resume, you have extensive experience managing complex branding initiatives. Henderson Manufacturing is exactly the type of client you claim to have worked with at your previous positions. Her face flushed. Yes, but what? Were you perhaps exaggerating your qualifications on your application? The question hung in the air between us like a sword. Isla's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Of course not. I just want to make sure I deliver the best possible results for Morrison Consulting. Then I suggest you get started. The preliminary strategy presentation is due to the client on Friday. That gives you 3.5 days. 3.5 days? Her voice pitched higher. For a complete rebranding strategy? I tilted my head, studying her reaction. Is that a problem? Because when Henderson Manufacturing's CEO called to inquire about our capabilities, I assured him that Morrison Consulting could deliver exceptional results within aggressive timelines. Was I wrong to make that promise? Isla realized she was trapped. If she complained about the timeline, she'd look incompetent. If she admitted she couldn't handle it, she'd have to confess that her resume was largely fiction. No, she said finally. I'll get started right away. Excellent. I'll expect a progress update tomorrow morning at 9. And Isla, I'll be reviewing every aspect of your work personally before it goes to the client. Our company's reputation depends on maintaining the highest standards. After she left, I permitted myself a small smile. The old Isla would have thrown a tantrum, made demands, found someone else to blame for the unreasonable expectations. But employee Isla couldn't do any of those things. Employee Isla had to swallow her pride and figure out how to succeed on my terms. The afternoon was even more entertaining. I made a point of walking around the office several times, ostensibly checking in with various departments, but actually observing how Isla interacted with her new colleagues. What I saw confirmed everything I'd suspected about her character. With senior staff members, she was obsequiously charming, laughing too hard at their jokes and agreeing with everything they said. With junior employees, she was dismissive and impatient, interrupting them and talking over their suggestions. But the most revealing moment came when she approached David Chen, our head of graphic design, about creating some preliminary mock-ups for the Henderson project. I need these by tomorrow morning, she announced, dropping a hastily scribbled list of requirements on his desk. And make sure they're polished. I don't have time to hold your hand through revisions. David looked up from his computer, his expression carefully neutral. Tomorrow morning might be challenging. I have 3 other projects with established deadlines and— Those can wait, Isla interrupted. The Henderson account is priority 1. Ms. Morrison made that very clear. I was standing just around the corner, close enough to hear every word. David was one of my most talented employees, a quiet, methodical artist who produced exceptional work when treated with respect. He was also someone who didn't respond well to being bulldozed. I understand it's important, David said carefully, but I'll need to check with Ms. Morrison about reprioritizing my other assignments. Isla's voice sharpened. I'm telling you what the priorities are. I'm the senior marketing coordinator, which means I outrank you. So when I give you an assignment, you do it. Period. The office around them had gone quiet. Other employees were pretending to work while obviously listening to the exchange. This was exactly the kind of workplace drama that could poison a team's morale, and everyone knew it. Actually, I said, stepping into view, David is correct to check with me about project prioritization. Isla spun around, her face flushed with embarrassment at being caught in her power play. Ms. Morrison, I was just trying to make sure the Henderson project stays on track. I appreciate your dedication, I replied smoothly. However, effective leadership means collaborating with your colleagues, not dictating to them. David, please stop by my office in a few minutes so we can discuss your current workload. I'm sure we can find a way to accommodate both the Henderson timeline and your other commitments. David nodded gratefully, while Isla looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Isla, may I see you in my office as well? It wasn't really a question. Once we were behind closed doors, I sat down and gestured for her to do the same. Let's talk about workplace dynamics, I began. At Morrison Consulting, we've built our reputation on collaboration and mutual respect. Our employees stay with us for years because they know they'll be treated fairly and professionally. Isla nodded. but I could see the defiance in her eyes. She was struggling between her natural instinct to argue and her recognition that I held all the power in this situation. David Chen has been with this company for 4 years, I continued. He's respected by his colleagues, trusted by our clients, and valued by management. When you spoke to him the way you just did, you weren't just disrespecting him. You were disrespecting the culture I've worked to build here. I'm sorry, she said, though she didn't sound particularly sorry. I was just feeling pressure to deliver results. Pressure is part of this job. How you handle that pressure is what determines whether you succeed or fail here. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to ensure she understood the gravity of what I was about to say. Isla, I want to be very clear about something. Your success at Morrison Consulting depends entirely on your ability to work effectively with your colleagues. If I hear about any more incidents like what just happened with David, we'll need to have a much more serious conversation about whether this position is the right fit for you. The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Shape up or ship out. I understand completely, she said. It won't happen again. I hope not, because replacing senior staff is expensive and disruptive, but it's something I won't hesitate to do if necessary. After she left my office for the second time that day, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over me. For 5 years, I'd watched Isla bully and manipulate her way through life, treating people like disposable objects that existed solely for her convenience. Now she was discovering what it felt like to be on the other end of that dynamic. My phone buzzed with another text from Dante. How was your day? Isla started her new job today. She seemed really nervous this morning, which isn't like her. I stared at the message for a moment, imagining my son's confusion as he tried to understand why his confident, controlling wife was suddenly anxious about work. I typed back, my day was very productive. I hope Isla's new position works out well for everyone involved. It was completely honest, though Dante would never understand the full meaning behind those words. As the afternoon wore on, I made sure to stay visible around the office. Every time Isla looked up from her desk, I was there, reviewing reports with the accounting team, discussing strategy with the sales department, or simply walking through the workspace with the quiet authority of someone who owned everything she could see. Each time our eyes met, I saw a little more of her confidence erode. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a job. This was a complete inversion of the power structure she'd grown accustomed to. For the first time in 5 years, I was the one in control. And tomorrow, we'd see exactly what Isla Williams was really made of when she had to perform under pressure, without anyone to manipulate or intimidate into doing her work for her. The game had only just begun, but I was already winning. By Wednesday morning, Isla looked like a completely different person. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup I'd grown accustomed to seeing at family gatherings. Instead, she sat at her desk with her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, and the kind of frazzled expression that comes from staying up all night trying to accomplish something you're not qualified to do. She'd been at the office until nearly 10 o'clock the night before, and I knew this because I'd deliberately stayed late myself, wanting to see how she'd handle the pressure. Through my office window, I'd watched her frantically Googling basic marketing concepts, printing out articles about brand strategy, and making phone call after phone call to her former colleagues, probably begging for advice or help. It was pathetic and deeply satisfying at the same time. At exactly 9 o'clock, she knocked on my office door for our scheduled progress meeting. "Come in," I called, not looking up from my computer screen. She entered carrying a folder and what appeared to be several sheets of hastily printed notes. Her hands were shaking slightly as she sat down across from my desk. "I have the preliminary strategy outline for Henderson Manufacturing," she said, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. "Let's see it." She opened the folder and began spreading papers across my desk. What I saw confirmed my worst expectations of her abilities. The presentation was a mess of copied paragraphs from various websites, generic marketing buzzwords strung together without any coherent strategy, and a handful of amateur-looking charts that wouldn't have impressed a first-year business student. I read through it slowly, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Isla fidgeted in her chair, occasionally clearing her throat as if preparing to explain or defend her work, but I didn't give her the opening. Finally, I set the papers down and looked at her directly. "This is unacceptable." Her face crumpled. I know it needs work. I was hoping you could give me some guidance on what specific changes." "Isla," I interrupted her, keeping my voice level but firm. "This isn't a rough draft that needs tweaking. This is fundamentally flawed from concept to execution." I picked up one of her charts, a pie graph that supposedly showed Henderson Manufacturing's current market position, but was actually just random percentages with no supporting data. "Where did these numbers come from?" I estimated them based on industry averages." "You estimated them." I repeated the words slowly, letting their absurdity sink in. "So you presented fictional data as if it were research-based analysis." "It's not fictional, it's approximated." "It's made up, Isla." "And if I presented this to Henderson Manufacturing's CEO, he would immediately recognize it as amateur work and terminate our contract." The color drained from her face. "I can fix it. I just need more time to—" "Time isn't the issue here. The issue is competence." The word hung in the air between us like a slap. I could see her struggling with the urge to defend herself, to argue, to shift blame onto someone else. But she couldn't. Not here. Not with me. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. It was the first time in 5 years that I'd heard genuine humility in her voice. Not the fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. Not the condescending politeness she employed when she was trying to appear superior. Just honest acknowledgement that she was in over her head. "I want you to start over," I said. "And this time, I want you to actually do the work instead of trying to fake your way through it." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. This contains real market research on Henderson Manufacturing's industry, their competitors, their target demographics, and their current brand positioning. I had our research team compile it yesterday afternoon. Isla's eyes widened as I slid the folder across the desk to her. You already had this information." "Of course I did. I don't take on clients without thoroughly understanding their market landscape. The question is whether you're capable of analyzing this data and turning it into a coherent strategy." She flipped through the folder, her expression shifting from relief to overwhelm as she saw the volume and complexity of the information. This is a lot to process." "Yes, it is, which is why senior marketing coordinators who earn $95,000 a year are expected to have the skills to handle it." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face as she continued to page through the research. "Isla, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your performance so far has been disappointing. If you were any other employee, I would already be considering termination." Her head snapped up, fear flickering in her eyes. "But," I continued, "I believe in giving people opportunities to prove themselves. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take this research and you're going to create a genuine strategic analysis. Not copied paragraphs from the internet, not made-up statistics, not generic marketing fluff. Real work." "Okay," she whispered. "The presentation is still due to the client on Friday. That gives you 2 days to demonstrate whether you belong in this position or not." After she left my office, I found myself thinking about Dante. My poor son had no idea that his wife was struggling to keep her job, that the woman he'd married was discovering she wasn't as competent as she'd always believed herself to be. But more than that, he had no idea that his mother, the woman he'd allowed to be dismissed and disrespected for years, was actually a successful businesswoman who'd built something meaningful from nothing. That afternoon, I got my answer about whether Isla was capable of change. I was walking past her desk around 3 o'clock when I overheard her on a phone call. Her voice was quiet, strained, and very different from her usual commanding tone. "David, I want to apologize for how I spoke to you yesterday," she was saying. "It was unprofessional, and I was completely out of line." I paused, pretending to examine some papers while I listened. "I know you have your own deadlines to manage, and I shouldn't have tried to steamroll you like that. Could we maybe start over and figure out a timeline that works for both of us?" David's response was muffled, but I could hear the surprise in his voice. This was probably the first genuine apology Isla had ever offered in her adult life. "Thank you," she continued. "I really appreciate your patience with me. I'm still learning how things work here, and I clearly made some mistakes yesterday." When she hung up the phone, she sat back in her chair and rubbed her face with both hands. She looked exhausted, frustrated, and humbled in a way I'd never seen before. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt something that wasn't anger or satisfaction. I felt something that might have been pity. But then I remembered Thanksgiving dinner. I remembered the spit on my face, the cruel words, the years of systematic exclusion from my son's life. And the pity evaporated. This wasn't about destroying Isla. It was about teaching her something she'd never learned: how to treat other people with basic human decency. Thursday morning brought another progress meeting, and the difference was remarkable. Isla arrived at my office with a professional-looking presentation folder, her hair neatly styled, and what appeared to be actual confidence rather than bravado. "I have the revised Henderson manufacturing strategy," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. What she showed me was competent, not brilliant, not groundbreaking, but solid professional work that demonstrated she'd actually analyzed the research and understood the client's needs. "This is much better," I said, and meant it. Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I really struggled with the first version. I think I was trying too hard to impress you instead of just doing good work." It was an interesting admission and surprisingly self-aware. "The client presentation is tomorrow at 10, I continued. "I'll be there to observe, but you'll be presenting the strategy yourself." Her composure faltered slightly. "You'll be there?" "Of course. Henderson Manufacturing is an important client, and this is your first major project. I want to ensure everything goes smoothly." What I didn't say was that I wanted to see how she performed under pressure, in front of people who had the power to reject her work. Would she maintain the humility she'd been learning, or would she revert to her old patterns of arrogance and blame-shifting when things got difficult? That evening, I was surprised to receive a phone call from Dante. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded tired. "How are you feeling? You seemed a little off when we talked earlier this week." "I'm feeling much better, sweetheart. How are you? You sound exhausted." "Yeah, it's been a weird week. Isla's been working really late on some big project at her new job. She seems really stressed about it, which is unusual for her. She's normally so confident about work stuff." I chose my words carefully. New jobs can be challenging. I'm sure she'll find her footing. "Yeah, maybe. It's just, I don't know, Mom. She seems different lately. More thoughtful, I guess. Like she's actually thinking about how her actions affect other people." My heart did a little skip. "Different how?" "Well, yesterday she apologized to me for something that happened months ago. She said she'd been thinking about how she treats people, and she realized she'd been unfair to me about some things. It was really unexpected." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of things?" "Just family stuff." She admitted that she might have been too controlling about how we spend our time, and that maybe she hadn't been fair about. He paused, and I held my breath. "About how often we see you." The admission hung in the air between us, loaded with years of unspoken resentment and hurt. "Dante, you don't need to—" "No, Mom, I do need to say this. I think Isla was right to be thinking about it. I let her make too many decisions about our family relationships, and that wasn't fair to you. Or to me, really." For the first time in months, my son sounded like the thoughtful, caring person I'd raised him to be. "I love you, sweetheart," I said simply. "I love you too, Mom. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? Just the three of us, but different this time." After I hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about transformation and consequences, and the strange ways that justice sometimes works itself out. Tomorrow, Isla would present her strategy to Henderson Manufacturing. She would either succeed or fail based on her own merits, her own work, her own ability to perform under pressure. But regardless of how that meeting went, something had already changed. The balance of power in my family was shifting. and for the first time in years, it was shifting in my favor. More importantly, it seemed like Isla was finally learning what I'd been trying to teach her all along. That respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And earning it required treating other people the way you wanted to be treated yourself. The Henderson manufacturing presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Friday morning in our main conference room. I arrived at 9:30 to find Isla already there, reviewing her notes one final time. She'd dressed professionally but not ostentatiously. A navy blazer and simple jewelry that suggested competence rather than trying to impress through expensive accessories. "Good morning," I said, setting my portfolio on the table. "Are you ready?" She looked up, and I was surprised to see genuine calm in her expression rather than the frantic anxiety I'd expected. "I think so," she replied. "I've gone over the presentation about 20 times, and I feel confident about the strategy. Whether Mr. Henderson agrees with it." She shrugged. "I guess we'll find out." It was a refreshingly honest assessment, without the false bravado she usually projected. At exactly 10 o'clock, James Henderson arrived with his marketing director, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Collins who'd built a reputation for asking difficult questions and accepting nothing less than excellence. "Ms. Morrison." Henderson shook my hand warmly. "Always a pleasure. I understand you have a new team member presenting today?" "I do. Isla Williams, our senior marketing coordinator. She's been leading the strategic development for your rebranding initiative." I watched Isla as she shook hands with both clients, noting the way she maintained professional composure without trying to dominate the interaction. The old Isla would have immediately launched into an aggressive sales pitch, trying to establish her credentials and control the conversation. "Let's see what you've developed," Henderson said, settling into his chair. For the next 45 minutes, I observed something I hadn't expected. Isla delivering a genuinely professional presentation. She began with a clear analysis of Henderson Manufacturing's current market position, using the research I'd provided, but demonstrating that she'd actually understood and synthesized the information rather than simply regurgitating it. She identified 3 key areas where the company's branding was inconsistent with their target demographics' preferences, and she proposed specific, actionable solutions for each problem. When Patricia Collins challenged her on the projected timeline for implementation, Isla didn't become defensive or make unrealistic promises. Instead, she acknowledged the complexity of the process and suggested a phased approach that would allow for adjustments based on market feedback. "That's a very measured approach," Collins noted, sounding impressed despite herself. "Most consultants promise everything immediately." "In my experience," Isla replied, "it's better to under-promise and over-deliver than the other way around." I almost did a double take. 6 months ago, over-promising and under-delivering had been Isla's standard operating procedure for everything from family dinners to household responsibilities. Henderson asked several detailed questions about budget allocation and expected return on investment. Isla handled each query professionally, referring to her research when she had solid data, and honestly admitting when she was making educated estimates rather than stating facts. By the time she finished, both clients were nodding approvingly. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we were hoping for," Henderson said. "Ms. Williams, you've clearly done your homework." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I have to credit Ms. Morrison and the Morrison consulting team for providing such comprehensive research support. This kind of analysis is only possible when everyone works together effectively." I felt a flutter of surprise at her gracious acknowledgement. The old Isla would have taken full credit for everything and minimized anyone else's contributions. After the clients left, having approved the strategy and agreed to move forward with implementation, Isla and I were alone in the conference room. "That went well," I said simply. She nodded, gathering her materials. It felt good to present work I was actually proud of. "You should be proud. That was professional, thorough, and well delivered." For a moment, we stood there in silence, and I could see her struggling with something. "Ms. Morrison," she said finally, "I owe you an apology, not just for last Thursday, but for a lot of things." I waited, letting her find her words. I've spent the last week realizing that I don't actually know how to work with people instead of just using them. I've been thinking about how I've treated your employees here, and how I've treated you, and how I've even treated Dante sometimes. She sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs, suddenly looking older than her 34 years. I don't think I ever learned how to earn respect instead of just demanding it, and I don't think I ever understood the difference between being strong and being cruel. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. People can change, Isla, I said quietly, but only if they actually want to. I want to. Oh, she looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no calculation in her expression, no hidden agenda, just exhaustion, and something that might have been genuine remorse. What happens now? She asked. I considered the question carefully. What did happen now? I'd gotten what I wanted. Isla had been humbled, had learned to work under my authority, had begun treating people with basic decency. My son was starting to see through her manipulations and remember his own values. Now you keep doing good work, I said finally. You keep treating your colleagues with respect. You keep earning your place here instead of trying to manipulate your way through it. And if I do that? If I really change, not just at work, but with family too? Then maybe we can all move forward instead of staying stuck in old patterns. That evening, Dante called me. Mom, I hope it's okay, but Isla and I would like to invite you to dinner this weekend, at our place. I felt my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. How many dinner invitations from them had ended in disappointment and hurt feelings? That sounds lovely, sweetheart. And Mom? Isla wanted me to tell you that she's cooking. She's been practicing all week, trying to learn some of the recipes she remembers from when you used to cook for us. My breath caught in my throat. She's been practicing? Yeah, it's been really sweet actually. She called me at work yesterday to ask about that stuffing recipe you used to make, and whether you put sage or thyme in your mashed potatoes. She said she wanted to do it right. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, looking at the photo of Dante's college graduation that still sat on my counter. In that picture, he was beaming with pride and accomplishment, his arm around my shoulders. Both of us genuinely happy. Maybe we could get back to that. Maybe not exactly the same, but something real and healthy, and based on mutual respect, rather than manipulation and control. Sunday evening arrived faster than I'd expected. I stood on Dante and Isla's front porch, holding a bottle of wine and trying to manage my expectations. This could still go wrong in a dozen different ways. Dante opened the door, and his smile was genuinely warm instead of strained and apologetic. Hi, Mom. Come in. Everything smells amazing. The house smelled like herbs and roasting vegetables and something that reminded me of the holiday meals I used to cook when Dante was young. I followed him into the kitchen, where I found Isla standing at the stove, wearing an apron I'd given her as a wedding gift that I'd never seen her use. Opal, she said, turning to face me. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. We looked at each other for a moment, both of us clearly uncertain about how to navigate this new dynamic. I made pot roast, she said finally. I know it's not as good as yours, but I followed the recipe you gave Dante for his birthday 2 years ago. I remembered that recipe. Dante had asked for it after mentioning that he missed my Sunday dinners, and I'd written it out carefully, including all the little details that made the difference between good and great. At the time, I'd assumed Isla would never actually use it. It smells wonderful, I said, and meant it. Dinner was a revelation, not just because the food was genuinely good, though it was, but because for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was having a meal with my family instead of enduring an ordeal. Isla asked about my work, and when I mentioned Morrison Consulting, she smiled ruefully. Your mother has been teaching me a lot about professional standards, she told Dante. I'm learning that there's a big difference between confidence and competence. Wait, Dante looked confused. You two work together? I watched as Isla took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself for an uncomfortable conversation. Your mother owns the company where I work, she said quietly. I had no idea when I applied for the job, but it's been educational. Dante's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom, you own a company? I do. Morrison Consulting. I started it after your father died. But why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at my son, at the genuine bewilderment in his expression, and realized that this conversation was long overdue, because I wanted to see if my family would value me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken hurt and disappointment. Mom, Dante's voice was small. Did we fail that test? I reached across the table and took his hand. We all made mistakes, sweetheart. But we're here now, and that's what matters. Isla cleared her throat. Dante, there are some things I need to apologize to your mother for, and some things I need to apologize to you for too. Over the next hour, she did exactly that. She acknowledged the ways she'd manipulated family situations to isolate me from my son. She admitted that she'd been threatened by my relationship with Dante and had tried to minimize my importance in his life. She even, with obvious difficulty, brought up Thanksgiving dinner. What I did was unforgivable, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was cruel and disrespectful, and I'm ashamed of myself. Dante looked stricken. Isla, what exactly happened at Thanksgiving? You said you had an argument, but she told him everything. The insults about my cooking, the escalating nastiness, and finally, the moment she spit in my face. When she finished, Dante was staring at her in horror. You did what? His voice was barely controlled. You spit in my mother's face? Yes, Isla whispered. And I can't take it back, but I can promise it will never happen again. Damn right it won't happen again, Dante snapped, his anger finally emerging. Isla, that's not just disrespectful, that's assault. That's disgusting. He turned to me, his eyes filled with tears. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd have to choose between us, and I was afraid of what that choice would be. Dante was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his plate. When he looked up again, his expression was resolved. There wouldn't have been a choice to make, he said firmly. What Isla did was wrong. Period. I don't care how angry she was or what she was going through. You don't treat people that way, especially not family. He looked at his wife and his voice was serious in a way I hadn't heard in years. Isla, I love you, but if you ever treat my mother like that again, I will leave you. Do you understand me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, and I swear to you it will never happen again. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the peace of victory or revenge, but the peace of a family that was finally being honest with each other. Isla wasn't magically transformed into the daughter-in-law of my dreams, but she was learning to be a decent human being. Dante was remembering how to set boundaries and stand up for what was right, and I was no longer the forgotten, dismissed mother sitting at the edge of their lives. At Morrison Consulting, Isla continued to improve as an employee. She worked hard, treated her colleagues with respect, and slowly earned her place on the team through competence rather than manipulation. More importantly, our family dinners became something I actually looked forward to. They weren't perfect. We all had too much history for that. But they were real in a way they hadn't been for years. 6 months later, when Dante called to tell me that he and Isla were expecting their first child, I felt genuine joy instead of the complicated mixture of happiness and dread that had characterized most of their major announcements. We were hoping, he said carefully, that you'd want to be involved, like really involved. Babysitting, holiday celebrations, all of it. I'd love that, sweetheart. And Mom? Isla wanted me to ask if you'd teach her how to make some of your recipes. She wants our kids to grow up eating the same food I did. That evening, I sat in my living room, looking out at the city lights and thinking about second chances and the strange ways that justice sometimes works itself out. I'd never intended to forgive Isla completely, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But I'd given her the opportunity to become a better person, and surprisingly, she'd taken it. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Isla. Thank you for not giving up on our family. I know I didn't deserve another chance, but I'm grateful you gave me one anyway. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, We all deserve the chance to become better than we were, and for the first time in years, I truly believed that was possible. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.